All right. Well, welcome officially. We're so glad you're here. Today, we are going to be having this amazing conversation with Rachel from Awareness to Advocacy, all about how early educators can support families as they begin to navigate the journey of thinking they might have a child who might be neurodivergent and how we approach that process as true partners. So thanks for sharing who you are and where you're located. And as we continue to chat, you're welcome to drop that into the chat box, the response to how you think families feel and how you want them to feel. A couple housekeeping points today. We will have an evaluation at the end. There'll be a link that we'll share out. And once you complete the evaluation, we will walk you through the process of accessing your certificate after that. So whether you're attending live in person with us right now, or if you're receiving the recording and watching that link, you will still be able to click on the link to the evaluation. And once that's complete, you'll receive access to your certificate. The recording will be on a landing page, and you'll also receive it via an email if you're attending with us live today. So you can rewatch it or share it with friends and colleagues. We're also sharing out a bunch of resources that you can find on our landing page, as well as embedded within the Canva Live link that has this whole presentation that we'll share with you. Our webinar is hopefully just right around 1 hour long. We're hoping to wrap up in time to have some questions at the end. I see some people asking how long it will be. And if you have connection issues or you need to hop off, you can always access the recording. And introducing Rachel and myself today. We are part of the early childhood team here at Becker School Supplies. I'm Christine Murray, and Rachel Waff, our early learning environments and inclusion lead. And some of you may know Becker's well, but for those joining us for the first time, we wanted to share just a little bit about who we are. We are a longstanding partner to early learning programs, and we provide materials and furniture and supplies. And of course, Rachel and I create resources and webinars all about helping you guys do your important work to support children and families. The education team helps evaluate and select the products that we offer and partner with the rest of the Becker's team to make sure everything we're offering is with you guys in mind and really attuned to the field, emerging research, and developmentally appropriate practice. So we're so glad you're here. We're grateful for you sharing your time with us, and we are honored to support you. As we come together, we're just going to take a few deep breaths, kind of settling into our bodies, whatever breathing technique feels good for you. And today, our invitation is to stay grounded in non-judgment, really thinking about showing up with a sense of openness and humility. As we have our time together, you're going to see these families that have shared so generously about their journeys. I find it really humbling, their vulnerability, and I think it's just a really great reminder to stay non-judgmental and empathetic and appreciate this experience that they're having and how we can best show up for them. So one more good breath in and out. And by the time we wrap up today, we're hoping we will all emerge with a deeper sense of confidence and more tools that we can navigate these conversations with families when they're sharing developmental concerns or questions, and really staying grounded in that strengths-based approach. We want to make sure your awareness of families' emotional landscape is more robust and like a little more grounded in their real life experience, what their journey may look and feel like, and appreciating that every journey is different. And using that insight and awareness to build genuine, collaborative, just caring relationships moving forward. And then finally, we're going to be sharing out resources that we want you to feel super comfortable accessing, knowing where to find them, how to use them, when to share them with families, and that you can kind of have these tools and resources at your fingertips as you develop your own inclusive practices, but also are able to offer referral guidance and help families connect to services. These are some of the resources we'll be sharing. The links are both in this presentation and on the landing page. We have a 3-page guide that we're calling the Educator's Guide to Support Pathways that will talk you through some of these progressions that Rachel's going to walk us through. So if you're, watching the webinar and watching the slides and like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of information, I might not remember it all. No worries, we gotcha. We also have an educator to family communication template, and Rachel's going to talk us through that, but that's something you can download and use or share with your programs and teachers or share with your colleagues. And finally, we are linking to this really wonderful resource from the CDC for families with tips about just how to begin that conversation with your pediatrician or your doctor if families are having developmental concerns.
Thanks so much, Christine, for that amazing introduction. My name is Rachel, and today we're going to be sharing stories from multiple families that have walked the early years of neurodivergency and have children with autism diagnosis. I myself am a proud mama of a now 11-year-old son with autism. His name is Abe. And I'll be honest with you, I struggled with whether I was going to be able to be vulnerable and open up about Abe's story today. But I felt that if I was going to ask other families to come forward and share their journey and have you guys benefit from that, then I needed to be able to do the same. So I will be threading Abe's story and my own story throughout today's webinar. So the first little bit here about Abe, this is a great picture of Abe around this time of year. This was around Halloween when he was 4 years old. So he was in my school's 4-year-old preschool program. I was a 3-year-old special education teacher at this time. And this is a book character dress up day. And Abe is dressed up as Dragons Love Tacos. If you have not read that book, I highly recommend it. And I am dressed up as the classic If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. So I look back on this image very fondly now, but in the process of getting Abe to this day in this dress up, at the time it was a little bit of a struggle, and I'm going to share why. There's a story behind the dragon costume. And first of all, the dragon costume started many years earlier when Abe was about 1.5, and he was dressed up as a dragon for Halloween. And I'd like to say that he picked out his own costume, but I was the dutiful mama, and I wanted my 2 boys to have coordinating costumes, and his big brother wanted to be a knight for Halloween. So that meant that Abe was going to get to be the dragon, as he used to say. So he was the dragon. So this is Abe at 1.5 in that dragon costume. And this is Abe after he found out that we were going to have the dress up day at school. And he absolutely loved this dragon costume and probably wore it about 2 or 3 times a week in our home from the time he was 1.5 until he was about 4.5. So as you can see, this dragon costume's not fitting him so well anymore. It goes up to his knees. You can't see his arms. It goes all the way up to his elbows. The little dragon paws are actually way up at his elbows. And I couldn't zip it up all the way. And there was no way that he was going to be able to wear this dragon costume to school. So much like any typically developing child, he had his own opinion of what he was going to do, and he held fast. And this is so much an amazing thing now that I realize that Abe truly has this as a gift, is he sticks to his guns. And so for about 3 days before this event at school, I was hectically searching for a dragon costume that had a hood and was similar enough that Abe was going to be okay wearing it. And I was fortunate enough that I had a friend that had this larger dragon costume that they were able to give us because we knew that it was not going to be given back once we had it. And after some long convincing, we were able to get Abe to try on the dragon costume and convince him that it looked more like the dragon from Dragons Love Tacos. And then we made some homemade tacos that we pinned all over him, and we were good to go. So now we have fond memories of it. But Abe is an absolutely amazing little guy, and we're going to share here in a second what makes all of these children that we're sharing journeys about today absolutely amazing. But for Abe, he sticks to his guns with things for sure, but he is creative and sensitive and empathetic. He feels more than anybody I know. He's also a very good indicator of whether someone absolutely loves him or doesn't. And that, as he's gotten older with Pierce, has been a little bit hard. But with Abe, if you really truly take the time to get him to know him, he's sometimes a tough egg to crack. But if you really take the time to get past that tough exterior with him and truly love him and get to know him for who he is, it's going to be one of the biggest gifts you have in your life and the best friendships. And I will say, as his mama, that I am truly privileged to have that opportunity to be his mama, but also as he gets older, to be able to be one of his best friends. So we're going to hear from some other families and what they think is absolutely amazing as well about their kiddos.
I think what makes him great is that he is just so excited about things, and he has such an interesting and fun energy. He also is just like he's very routine driven, which is not a surprise, but that's honestly one of my favorite things about him is that he just has like his little routines. So just as an example, he was doing that this morning. In the mornings when he gets ready, he gets himself ready for school, he does everything that he does, and then the last thing that he does before he leaves is he actually packs my work bag for me, which is kind of funny because I depending on the day, my schedule varies a bit. Depending on the day, I either leave like a half an hour or sometimes up to 2 hours after he leaves. And like, I actually need my computer out of my work bag because I might be sitting at my desk to do something. But he will not allow me. Like if I try to leave it out, he's like, no, he like packs it all up. He like zips it up. He does everything. He like gets my cords together, and it's just very funny. Like, so I just enjoy that he keeps us on schedule. He always is just like, we got to keep things together. So,
and he makes everybody fall in love with him pretty much instantaneously. He's super sweet. He's very affectionate. He's got a great smile, and generally is always really happy. Sometimes he has some bad days like everybody else, but usually the feedback that I get from people is that they just love what a snuggle bug he is, and just how affectionate he is with everybody.
Oh, I love that.
Liam is probably the happiest little kid. He's extremely outgoing, which is, I guess, stereotypically people don't really think of people on the spectrum being outgoing. I always say he's like on the opposite end of the spectrum.
God, he's hilarious. He has such a quick wit and says the most random things that is just he
Having a hard time. I'm sorry.
things that is just he really is the whole package.
Yeah. So that last little guy was actually one of my students, and he is definitely the whole package. He is 14 years old now. So I really appreciate the parents sharing out what was amazing about their individual kiddos here. So how can we as educators support these families through the early journey of neurodivergency and autism diagnosis? How can we light the way and do so with care and clarity? We really want to be communicating our concerns with care and clarity. And we can help families connect with the right resources and take positive next steps for their child. So we really want to be their partners in this and walk hand in hand with them so they're not feeling alone as they're walking through this and taking these next steps for their child. And we want to be competent and understand what those right resources are so we can help steer them in the right direction. So some first conversation tips as educators. So if a family is coming to us with developmental concerns, if they're saying, hey, I have a concern about my child, what can we do? There's a few options. There is this great CDC resource here that really guides families to either speaking with their pediatrician or reaching out for early intervention services if that child is under the age of 3. And then also talking about what the evaluation process for services is for an older child as well. So this is a great resource. I recommend that you print it out and have it available so that if you have a parent that comes to you and says, I'm concerned about my child's development, you can provide this next step for them. We really want to, when we're sharing our own concerns about a child, we want to be clear and it needs to be observable things. We don't want to place our judgment and our skewed ideas into this situation. We really want to say what we're observing, but also why it's concerning to us. So if we're telling a parent that we're concerned because their child is not sitting and attending to large group on the rug, a parent may not understand what the expectation for a 3 or 4-year-old is. But if you were to say, in large group time, our class is sitting for 5 to 10 minutes and listening to a story and singing songs and dancing together and participating. And everyone's participating together in that. And Holly is having a really hard time. She is often away from the group and not willing to join. We're really trying some different strategies. Do you have any recommendations? So we're really putting that concrete information out there for that family. And we're never providing our ideas for what a diagnosis may be. We're never going to say, I think your child has a speech delay, or I think your child has autism, because we are not diagnosticians. Even as a special educator who was doing the tests that may later lead to a diagnosis, there was a whole team of experts that was doing that. It was never my job or my privilege to be able to share that with the parent. We always are working together to do that. We do not want to be diagnosticians here. Now, if a family comes to you and says, I think my child has autism, our answer is not going to be to confirm or deny that at all for the family, whether we think one way or the other. What we're going to do is instead steer them to the resources that they can utilize for someone with that level of expertise to be able to share with them. So another great tool through the CDC is the milestone tracker. And this is available through all early childhood, so birth on. And I highly recommend that you download it as an educator so that you can see how the app works and then recommend it for families. So if you have a family that comes to you, or if you're going to a family with those beginning concerns, you can mention this app to them. You can, as an educator, actually track those milestones for the children that you care for and then ask the family to do the same. So you're able to actually collaborate with them and say, hey, this is what we're seeing at school, and they can share what they're seeing at home. The really cool thing about this app is that it gives you pictures and videos that demonstrate what that skill is and what it should look like for a child at that specific age. And then it asks the parents specific questions related to that. Is that child doing this all the time? Are they doing it sometimes? Are they not doing it at all? It compiles all that information and then shares with that family that if it's a concern, an area of concern that may need additional support, or if that child is developing on track or not. So great resource that you can utilize. Highly recommend that you download it yourself. And then even giving it to all your parents at the beginning of the school year, it is an absolutely amazing resource for them. So we talked a little bit about making sure that we are being supportive and with care and clarity for the families that we work with. And Krista here is going to share a situation where she felt unsupported within those early years of diagnosis for her son.
The teacher he had at the time, and I know she had good intentions, but this is like a memory that will stick in my mind. Brought to my attention certain things and pretty much kind of dropped the bomb saying, I think he has autism, and then just dropped it. So she noticed things like the pencil holding. I think there was one day in class where they were playing like Jenga and he just knocked over someone else's blocks. And I assume looking back, that was before I had the knowledge I do now, but probably had a meltdown. And she kind of came to me with this stuff and, observations, which I appreciate, and then said something along the lines of like, I think he has autism, or this seems like autism, and then just kind of dropped it. And I remember being in my car that day. I was pregnant with my daughter, so my emotions were already a little bit bonkers. But I remember just sitting in my car and crying for like an hour because it wasn't that could be a possibility, because probably I already kind of knew this was even before we had any sort of testing. So this was the catalyst of me like becoming the advocate that I am for him in terms of his autism now. But I remember sitting in my car crying for like an hour, calling my husband and just like not knowing what to do. So I know the intentions were there, but I think the delivery of it made me feel.
Oh, that one cut out too. So what she's sharing is that the delivery of this really made her feel lost. And so our goal as educators a lot of times is we want to fix things and we want to fix things quickly. And sometimes our response may be detrimental to the situation. So if that educator had approached it with very concrete, clear information, along with a follow up of this is what our next steps can be with this situation, then hopefully Krista would not have felt lost in that situation. She still went and advocated for her child and began the process of diagnosis here, but we really want to prevent the possibility of those traumatic memories coming up with our families, and how can we really work together with them in this process and support them. And again, we're never going to provide our thoughts on diagnosis for this. We're always going to refer family, whether we think a family, their concerns are valid or our concerns are valid, that doesn't matter. We really just want to refer them to the right organization that's going to be able to help them through this process. So mapping the journey. So this part, I really want you guys to hang in there with me. You're going to have access to all of this information afterwards because it's a lot. And I also want you to really be reflective as we move through this and think about all of this information and how overwhelming it has to be to a family. It's a lot of information and a lot of different pathways that are sometimes difficult for families to understand as they're moving through this process. There we go. All right, so different service pathways. There are multiple pathways for families to seek out a diagnosis and receive services for their child. We have the medical pathway, the Part C early intervention pathway, and then the public school system. The medical pathway can be sought out at any age. Part C early intervention is for birth to age 3, but on their 3rd birthday, they can no longer receive those services. At the age of 3, that's when we start seeing special education services within the public school setting. So you can seek medical at the same time as you're seeking Part C and Part B services. But Part C and Part B services cannot coincide with each other. So medical, the reason for that is that in the medical realm, they are billing your insurance, but then in the public school system, they're not doing that. So you can actually receive services medically as well as the school system, and lots of families do that. So for medical, they are billing your insurance, and then there is a doctor or a clinician that is really doing that testing and determining that diagnosis for that child. And then the diagnosis that is received after that evaluation is really guiding treatment. So they may determine that the child needs speech services, and they're going to refer to a medical-based speech clinician. They may say that the child has autism and recommend ABA therapy for that child. Lots of different pathways, and parents can choose based on what they feel is best for their child here. This is setting wise. Medically is typically in what we would call a clinical setting. The families are having to bring that child to receive therapy services outside of the home. Now, for context, a child may qualify medically and have a diagnosis that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to receive services through early intervention or services within the public school system. There are lots of children that have a medical diagnosis of ADHD or sometimes even autism that qualify medically and have those services provided there, but then the school system says it's not educationally relevant. So that's often difficult for parents to understand, and rightfully so. For early intervention, it's low cost and it's on a sliding scale. So they bill insurance, and then anything that's left, they look at that family's income and they determine what their out-of-pocket costs will be. It's very little, even compared to if they had an insurance copay. And then the eligibility determination is coming through, they have a service coordinator, and then those different clinicians, the speech therapist that's doing the evaluation or the developmental specialist, all of them are bringing all of that assessment data together to determine if that child needs their services. And then some children are actually eligible at birth or shortly thereafter. If you have a child that is extremely premature, they're going to automatically be eligible for early intervention services. Same goes if a child, when they're born, has an immediate diagnosis, such as deafness, or if they're deaf or blind, or if they have Down syndrome or cerebral palsy. So any of those would have an automatic qualification for early intervention services, and some children receive early intervention services before they've even left the NICU. As far as settings, they are very family centered. So they're going to try and serve that child in their home setting. Childcare, they may be coming to grandma's house. If grandma's the one that's watching the child during the day, they're coming to wherever that child is in their natural environment. For the school system, it starts at age 3, but that does vary a little bit depending on the state. Some states actually provide school-based special education services in the 2-year-old year. And the reason they do that is you may have a child, say, that has a birthday that is in January, and they want to make sure that that child is able to start school with their peers at the beginning of the school year and doesn't have to start halfway through. So that's why we have some areas where they have them start when they're 2. There is no cost. School provides free and appropriate education, no cost for the evaluation, no cost for any of the services that the child receives there. And then the IEP team is determining eligibility. So that, similar to early intervention, there's a whole team that takes part in the evaluation process, and they're the ones that are sitting down at the table with the family and discussing the results and determining if the child is eligible and what they're eligible for. And then setting wise, we're in public schools, they're providing services in what we call the least restrictive environment. And a lot of times that is in a public preschool, in an inclusive setting. Sometimes it's self-contained, sometimes it's what we call reverse inclusion. And depending on the school system, there are different models they use. Sometimes they will go into a private preschool setting. I did that when I worked with the public school and serve children that are already successfully integrated into a private childcare center. You also may have children that may have significant medical needs, and then we would provide homebound services. So I did that when I worked with the public school system. I would go and serve children that were not able to come to the school setting. And then the public schools special education services are really child-centered. So those goals that are being created are really focused on the child and their skill level and those evaluation results, versus an early intervention, they're really looking at what the family's goals are for their family as a whole and for that child. So with Part C services, early intervention, this is kind of we're going to walk you through that process. So you actually, as an educator, can refer a child to early intervention. I do recommend that you go ahead in your area and look up who the early intervention agency is that you could reach out to if you had a child that you wanted to refer. So a teacher can make the referral, a family, a clinician. I do recommend, highly recommend, that if you are doing a referral for early intervention, there are a couple things that happen. A, you need to make sure that you have communicated this with the family. No family wants to get a call from early intervention that there's concerns about their child's development that you have not spoken to previously about this. Now, this is twofold, because if they get that call and they're caught off guard, they may not provide consent for evaluation. That family is the one that determines whether testing occurs. Whether you like it or not, if a family says, no, I'm not interested in services right now, that is their right as a family. So we want to make sure that we're collaborating with them when we're doing this process. Also, if you are an educator, make sure that you are speaking with your center director or your principal about this before this is occurring. We want everybody to be on board with this and be aware of it so no one is caught off guard during the referral process. So once a family either initiates or consents to that referral that you sent in, there are only 45 days. This is actually much slower than the medical process that I'll talk about in a sec. So within 45 days, they've got to do the full assessment process. They have to sit down and determine eligibility and develop an IFSP, which is an individualized family service plan. It's a plan that spells out the specific services and the frequency for the child, as well as goals for that child to meet. So the difference between this and this timeline and the medical piece is sometimes medically, children are seen right away and they receive a diagnosis. Sometimes they're told it could be 6 months to a year before they get in. So if you have a family that goes to their doctor and does that referral process with their doctor, and they come back to you and they say, oh, the doctor said, to call this developmental clinic, I called them, they're on the wait list, it's going to be 6 months to a year. Go ahead and mention to them that in that process that they can continue that process, but that they can also seek early intervention and that you can help them with that. You can help them with the referral, because they're going to be able to get those early intervention services started often much quicker than they can when they're seeking it medically, because there's not a timeline that's required within that medical pathway. So once that IFSP is developed and consented by the parent, those services have to begin within 30 days. And those services are going to look different for every child. It's individualized. So it may be that they're receiving occupational therapy services, speech therapy, physical therapy, developmental services. They may be receiving them all. They may only be receiving one of those. It's based on their individual needs. And then that service coordinator that's working with them to facilitate all of this has to make sure that they are meeting with the family at least every 6 months to update that child's IFSP and review it in general. So they've started this process. They're going through early intervention services. They're getting all these therapies and interventions. What happens next, right? Because it has to end at their 3rd birthday. There's a few different things. A transition meeting has to occur between the early intervention team and the parent, and they have to determine what those next steps are. And those steps have to be ready to go by that child's 3rd birthday so that they don't have what we call a lapse in coverage. So there's 3 different options here. It may be that they determine together that services are no longer required. This child has had early intervention. Maybe they were premature and, oh my goodness, they're doing great. They're meeting all their milestones now and services can stop. Or they may say, my child is only receiving speech services and they are doing really well in their private childcare setting. I really don't want them to have to switch to the school setting. That's what they're requiring if we want them to get speech services in school. So we're just going to continue and just get private speech services outside of the school setting, and we'll wait and deal with the school IEP evaluation process when they're in kindergarten, and that they can consent to that, and that's fine. Another option is they can transition to the public school setting. And we're going to go over all the steps. It's very similar to early intervention, to seeing if they qualify for that public school special education services. And that all has to be completed before their third birthday, so that right on that third birthday, that child can begin receiving those services so they don't have a lapse in their therapy services that they need. So very similar with Part B, which is our public school setting. You have a referral, whether it's coming straight from a family that has concern or if it's coming through early intervention. Then they're meeting together to determine if evaluation is warranted. And what that means is the parent is sitting down with school staff that includes a general educator, a principal, a special educator, and they're discussing that family's concerns. And as a team, they have to say that they suspect a disability. If they do not suspect a disability, they cannot move forward with evaluation. Sometimes there's this pre-screening that occurs in this that kind of looks at the child's development. So if the team says no, they do not meet criteria for evaluation, a letter is provided that's called prior written notice that's provided to the parent that just spells that out and why. So you may have a family that comes back to you with that information and says they weren't eligible for evaluation. If they're eligible to evaluation, again, parents have to give consent, just like early intervention. That child is evaluated. The eligibility team meets back together, just like an early intervention, and they determine, yes, this child qualifies for special education services, or no, they don't. Then they have to look at lots of different criteria and determine what that child qualifies under. And it may be that they qualify under autism. They could qualify under speech language impairment, other health impairment. There's a whole long list, and they have to find the best fit for that child. And then they're going to determine if they qualify for other services. So maybe they qualify for developmental services and speech services. So they'll go through that. Or they'll say, we look through all this testing and this child does not have a significant enough delay that is impacting their education. Therefore, they do not qualify for special education services, but here are some other recommendations that we have. So at that point, the process stops. Additional recommendations may be made, but it ends there. If they're found eligible, then an IEP is developed, just like that IFSP, and then it is within 30 days. The family gives permission for that, and the services begin within the school system. So we're going to listen here to one family's. This is Carla with her little guy Benny, the path that they took to receiving a diagnosis and services for their child. Every family's path looks a little different.
With Benny, signs of autism around the 12-month mark. He is a very like the stereotypical child with autism, the flapping hands, no eye contact, not responding to his name. I mean, you read it in a textbook, and that's what Benny was, really starting at 12 months of age is when we noticed it. At least for me, I didn't notice anything prior to that. He was a very happy baby, was always smiling. I noticed some things like, we were at a restaurant and something loud happened and he wouldn't turn around to look at it. But generally speaking, I had no inkling of the autism until about 12 months. And then we did some speech, like early intervention, speech therapy in North Carolina, where we lived, starting at about 16 months. And then we moved to Virginia, where we maintained that early intervention. We moved to when he was 18 months up until about, I would say 36 months, I think that's when it stops, if I'm not mistaken, at about 3, because then the preschool system kind of takes over. So he got his diagnosis at 24 months. I basically we saw the pediatrician when we got here to establish, and we hadn't gotten the diagnosis yet. And when we established, I said, I concerned my son has autism, and they placed the referral, and we got an appointment within a month from the time, which is like very different than I think most.
So sorry, that one got cut off too. So what she's sharing is, yes, it's very difficult often for families to get in for those services, but she did a great job of illustrating and sharing their journey through diagnosis. So AIDS was a little different. Even as a special educator, I had inklings of thinking that it was possible that he had autism. Our first concern was really his speech. He wasn't talking as early as his big brother had. And rigid routines. He never took a bottle. We had a really difficult time. We tried to have him be in a larger childcare setting, and I think he was there maybe half a week. We had a really hard time with it, and we were blessed. We actually had a neighbor that had a child that was a little bit older than Abe, and she was able to take him, and she just kind of wore him in an ergo when he was really little, like 6, 8 months old even, most of the day, because he had a really hard time transitioning to a different environment. At home, he did great because we had that rigid routine and he knew it. But when he was in a different environment, it definitely took him longer to adapt to that. So that speech delay was really the biggest concern. But at first, we actually went the medical route, starting when he was about 1.5, and talked to our pediatrician, and we got referrals for a speech evaluation, occupational therapy evaluation, and physical therapy evaluation. He had very low tone and he had some sensory things going on. So we went to each of those individual clinicians and they did their own assessment and said, yes, he qualifies. And then they billed through insurance. We took him to outpatient clinical services weekly for each of those. So that was a lot for us to juggle at that time as full-time working parents. And we had 2 boys. And then when he was about 2.5, that's when we were like, okay, we need a little bit more than this. He was in a private church, like part day preschool, and he did fairly well with that. They had a great understanding of him, but we really wanted additional interventions. And of course, I worked for the public school system, so as a special educator. So as soon as he was old enough in our state at age 2, they could enroll in the special education preschool program. He went through the evaluation process and qualified again. As at that point, it was as a developmental delay, which is kind of we're not sure if it's autism or not yet. We kind of want to do this wait and see, give him some more time to develop, which we were fine with. He was still going to get the services he needed. And so he had developmental services in the special education, like reverse inclusion preschool program. And then he had speech therapy services, occupational therapy services, and physical therapy services. He had a really low tone, like I mentioned, and he was a significant toe walker. He still walks on his toes, which that is an indicator sometimes of children with autism, but there are a lot of kids that toe walk that do not have autism. So don't use that as your main indicator when you're worried about autism, for sure. So he went through that evaluation process, qualified for the school system, continued with that developmental delay diagnosis until he was school age. And then that's when we went through reevaluation with the school and medically. We sought our local developmental clinic and received that autism diagnosis for him. So as far as Part C and Part B, these are the percentage of students, our children, in each of these pathways that are receiving services. So as you can see, for Part C, the highest level is about 10% of children, and the lowest level is right around 3% of children that are receiving services, which is a stark contrast from special education services, where we have upwards of 21% and the low being 12%. So the states have done a really great job of recognizing this concern and this discrepancy. And they recognize that we are under identifying students in Part C, that a lot of those kiddos are out there in private childcare settings or at home with family members, and they're not getting the early intervention that they need. So there is a system called Child Find, where states are trying to provide funding to reach out to families so that they can better understand the services that are available to them and get those early intervention services that are so desperately needed. In the school system, that level is higher, obviously, because these kids are in kindergarten or first grade. They are automatically in schools, and you have educators and special educators that are there keeping an eye on them. But what's important for you guys to note in this is that you are often the first person outside of the family that is seeing this child on a day-to-day basis. Even pediatricians, until a parent brings up concern, often aren't seeing it because they're only seeing that child for 15 or 20 minutes. So your role is really crucial in speaking up and helping facilitate that child being referred to early intervention or school-based services if you have concerns. So do speak up, but do so in a caring, clarifying way for them. So families paving the way. The families that I interviewed have already been through this process. All of their children are first grade and up. So we really want to take the information that they're providing us today and recognize the importance and take the takeaway that we can have from this. So they're going to share some great takeaways from this and how we can help that. The first piece here is Joanna sharing that as educators, we really want to be communication partners. And when she shared this with me, I really felt like I had an understanding of this at the higher grade level, but in early childhood, I didn't, because I was an early childhood special educator. So I knew the different routes of services for my child. I knew what I should expect developmentally from him and when to be concerned. But that's not the case with most parents. So for me, I recognized this when my child got a little bit older, and I am not a third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade teacher. So when I was hearing from my child's teacher what happened in the school day, you often have this feeling of helplessness or inadequacy, because you're like, okay, what am I supposed to do at home? How am I supposed to do this? And Joanna shows that here.
I need a communication partner to engage with that. And so
Communication partner, I love that.
yeah, looking at this, I mean, it's a relationship that you're building with these, not just with their kids, but with their families, I think. And so and I know that, education and our system of education is very messy and has a lot of flaws, and I get it. I understand that a lot, but like just approaching parents as potential partners and not somebody that you're at odds with. And just, I think a lot actually about, we say to Will a lot, you have to use your words. Sometimes grown-ups, we have to use our words too. I need to know what you actually mean. Like I think that's one of the things that has always sort of frustrated me with like the report of like, this happened. It's like, okay, thank you. Please use your words. Tell me what you would like me to do with this information. And if there's nothing I need to do with it, okay, fair enough. Like, again, again, some of it's experience. You're a parent for longer and you kind of learn what you get the call from the school nurse that he fell down. It's like, yep, thanks for the notification. I understand you have to do that. Have a nice day. But if there's actually something that you need me to take action on, tell me so. I'll probably do it. Like, in fact,
Nope, come on.
I almost.
So she says she almost certainly will. So she's going to do what she's asked to do if we really are communicating that. So after hearing that from Joanna, I really took that to heart. And as an ed team, we collaborated and created this communication partnership form that you can utilize. So this is going to be available to you to print out, but it really highlights that piece of, hey, I'm just sharing this information with you. I'm starting to, especially when that child's first starting receiving care with you and we're sharing those little tidbits. So no need to respond, no additional actions needed here. Just, hey, I wanted to share this observation of your child. And again, it needs to be positive. And typically my recommendation is we have something called, I had a mentor once share this advice, the bop, bop, burp. So we have 2 pats on our back before every burp. So we want to have 2 positives before we're sharing that thing that may be more uncomfortable with our.
Rachel might have a little glitch, so we'll give her a minute.
Is it not working? Can you hear me?
There you are. You're back.
Yep. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Thanks for letting me know. What's the last thing you heard?
You were bopping.
Okay. Yeah. So that's important. Yes. So the bop bop burp. So 2 positives for everything that's a little bit more uncomfortable to talk about. So if we're coming to these families with constant negativity and concerns, they're going to shut down. So we really have to build that strong rapport with them and have them understand that we truly love and care for them and their child, before we're getting to the point when we are talking about referral or our diagnosis or anything in the future with them. And if they're trusting us to come to us at that point with that, then we need to be prepared with that guidance that we mentioned before. So having this very simple form that says no response needed, I'm just sharing information with you, or let's chat, here's some times I can chat. Another big piece of advice here, number one, you want to have these conversations that are difficult in person. And if you can't have them in person, then by phone. We're never going to have this dialogue in writing. Just because no parent wants to try and figure out and analyze your handwritten note or your text message about your concern for their child. So we really want to have these conversations and be prepared in that conversation to also share the positive, because it's hard to hear that. I know as a parent myself, hearing that from educators is often hard, and you just feel helpless as to how you can help your child. So really coming to that table with possible solutions, or asking for that parent input there, and really creating this partnership together. And so this final piece is really advice for you guys as educators from these families that I interviewed. And for me, I think the biggest piece is it's not always easy for families, and they understand a lot more about their child than we often give them credit for. And we need to really form that partnership with them instead of that defensive wall. Because that definitely, and I know I've been there too. As an educator, that does happen sometimes. So how can we really think about how we can form these partnerships? And you may have a family or a parent that does become defensive, and to recognize that defensiveness doesn't necessarily mean that they feel that directly about you. It's just a really hard time in their journey at that moment. And then again, recognizing that strength and sharing it with them often. And the bottom line here is that you love my kid, and you love truly who they are, and you're recognizing their strength. If you're going day in and day out and that child is stressing you out and you're sharing that with the family, think about how that is making them feel. But if you can find that 1 or 2 things that are really strengths that you can recognize and highlight and share with that family, but also share within your heart for that child, they're going to feel it. I know my Abe is the best sniffer outer of who is really with it with him and who is not. And so just loving them unconditionally and supporting them the best that you know how.
Supporting and accepting him for who he
Exactly.
was. Like, William is unapologetically himself, and I love that about him. No matter what others think, say, or do around him, he doesn't change for them, either in that moment or otherwise. So even just accepting him, like, this is an older story, but when he was in elementary school, he had he he thought he was Spider-Man. Frankly, he still does. But he would come in and his teachers would say, like, they would find him plastered like on the wall, like he was crawling up it. And they just left him there. You know, one of his teachers was like, when you feel like you're like out of your web, just come on and join class. But I think also like his teachers, and I could say this a lot for his preschool because they were extremely supportive of our family. They treated both our kids went there till they didn't have to anymore. They loved him and they cared for him, and you know, they supported who he was at that time. We didn't quite get into our superhero likings as much, but you know, at the time, whatever was his interest fixation, you know, they supported and they encouraged it. So
treating like treat the child to the best of your ability the same way that you would treat any other child, and then adjust your behavior based off of their response. But overall, to assume the competence and speak in front of them the same way that you would speak in front of another child.
The biggest thing that educators and administrators still can't understand is that autism is not a blanket ailment. It looks different for every single child, and it changes almost, you'd think almost daily for every single child. And it's not something that is really
So lots of great feedback and information from these families. I hope that you can take it and utilize it. And hopefully we'll have a few minutes here at the end. Christine is going to wrap up, but if you need to head out right at 2, we completely understand. If you're able to hang on in the chat and share some of your questions that you may have that we can answer, we'd love to do that as well. Go ahead, Christine. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. So Terry just dropped our landing page link in here, which also has all of our resources. So all of the things we've talked about are either available on that landing page directly, or if you click into the Canva Live link to our presentation, they are embedded there as well. So for every webinar, we offer an inspiration to action guide to capture the things that we're like, oh, I want to remember that. This is what I'm going to do to kind of integrate this into my practice. That is what that resource is to support you with. And then the pathways that Rachel spoke of, we have those graphics for you as a reference, and then the template as well as a CDC guide.
All right, sorry, Christine. I was gonna say, we'll hold off on those questions. We're gonna show you the next slide that has that survey, and we can do those questions while we are doing that survey so we can respect everybody's time.
Perfect. You read my mind, Rachel.
Yep, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great. So you can either scan the QR code depending on how you're watching this, or click on the link in the chat, and that will take you to our evaluation. And we really read every response and really try to consider all the feedback and suggestions moving forward. So we're so appreciative of you joining us and then also taking the time to give us feedback. Once you click submit, you'll get this page that will have this is a zoom in of that window. It says, thank you for submitting. Click here for your certificate. And that will take you to a PDF that you can download, put